This week's Parsha is Parsha Yisro. Vayishma Yisro kohen Midian chosen Moshe es kol asher asa Elokim leMoshe l'Yisrael amoy ki hotzi Hashem es Yisrael miMitzrayim. Yisro, who was they translate him as the minister of Midian. He was the chief priest, the high priest of the people of Midian. He was Moshe's father-in-law. Remember, Moshe at the burning bush was taken in by Yisro. He married Yisro's daughter Tzipporah. And the Torah says, Yisro, the father of Moshe, heard everything that Hashem did for Moses and the Jewish people, that Hashem had taken us out of Egypt. And Rashi brings in what did Yisro hear about? What is it that Yisro heard? Because the next pasuk then says, Yisro, Moshe's father-in-law, it says it twice that his father-in-law, took Tzipporah, Moshe's wife, and his two sons after his wife after she'd sent away. When Moshe went back to Egypt from Midian after the burning bush, Hashem said go back. He took Tzipporah and his two sons. His one was newborn son, and off they went to meet Aaron. And Aaron says, "Not going to be a pretty place to bring your wife and kids. Send them back to Midian, and at some point they'll join us." And so they went back. So now Yisro has come to Moshe, bringing Tzipporah and Moshe's two sons, or her two sons, and the Torah names them. The one was Gershom. Why was he called Gershom? Because Moshe had said that he himself was a sojourner in a foreign land. Ger meaning, we use the word for a convert, for a person who's living in a land that's not his. And his second son was named Eliezer because the God of my father came to my aid. Eliezer is Eli is Hashem's name, and he came to help him along when he saved me from the sword of Paro. So Moshe named his children Gershom and Eliezer, remembering where he was. Remembering he was brought up in Paro's palace, but he always knew he was a young Jewish boy, even though he was privileged to be a prince in the palace. He remembered this and he named his two sons that. So Yisro comes along and he brings Tzipporah and Gershom and Eliezer and he joins the Jewish people. What did Yisro hear that made him come along to join the Jewish people? So Rashi says there again, firstly Rashi says Yisro had 7 names. Various places in the Torah is called 7 different things. Now they say about Yisro that, why did he have 7 names? Because he had 7 daughters. And when a person makes himself insolvent, he has to change his company's name. So Yisro went insolvent 7 times and changed his name 7 times. That was the joke. But he's called 7 different names because different things that he did. So he was called Yeser, for example, because Rashi says another passage in the Torah was added. We've got a Torah Parsha, a whole Parsha called Parsha's Yisro. So much so that this is the Parsha of which we will come to, of the Matan Torah. The giving of the Torah, Seres HaDibros, was in Yisro's Parsha. Yisro was not Jewish. He was the high priest of Midian. He became Jewish. He converted. This was the point where he converted. Yeah, at this point now, when he joined the Jewish people. Then the Rashi brings all the reasons, all the different names that he had, why he's called all these different names, not for now. He was the father of Moshe, and it says, what did Yisro hear? At the beginning it says, Ma Shama Uva, what did he hear? He heard Kriyas Yamsuf El Milchames Amalek. He heard about last week's Parsha. He heard that Hashem had taken us out of Egypt, and he had split the sea for us, and we had battled against Amalek. Amalek attacked us. If you remember, right at the end of last week's Parsha, Amalek attacked us. Amalek being our cousins. They were the children of Esav, and they came and attacked us as we were going through the desert. At the time between leaving Egypt, 7 days later we went through the desert, and 42 days after that we got the Torah. This is that period of time. So Yisro was the only person in the whole world that heard that Hashem had split the sea for us and Amalek had attacked us, and that caused Yisro to come and join the Jewish people. Every single person in the world heard. In fact, every body of water in the entire world split. The world knew what was going on. The world knew that the Jewish people had been taken out. These, they had Twitter and WhatsApp and X and all these other programs. They knew exactly what was going on. World was informed. World heard. Hashem has taken his people out of Egypt. Hashem has now split the sea and wiped out the Egyptians. And Yisro was the only person who came. Because we all say this, Hashem, show me a miracle, and then I'll change, and then I'll do this. The whole world saw miracles. In fact, the Jewish people saw miracles. Last week's parsha, one after another. And what did they do? They complained and complained and complained and never changed. In fact, so much so, in 3 weeks' time, 5 weeks' time, we're going to have Parshas Kisisa. 40 days after the giving of the Torah, we sinned at the golden calf. After we'd seen, and we'll discuss what we had seen, please God, later on, at this revelation. Hashem showed himself directly to the Jewish people, and we still sinned. We walked out of Egypt with matzah. And we know, Pesach Seder, many people have the thing where they put the matzah on the back and they walk around the table. Very big Sephardi custom, but it's a beautiful custom for kids. This is what we walked out with, a bag of matzah. That matzah lasted us for 31 days. Because when we got the manna, the Torah says in last week's parsha, on the 15th of the second month, in other words, 31 days after we left Egypt, we complained we didn't have any food. But we'd had the few pieces of matzah. How much matzah are you going to take at $100 a box? It didn't cost them that much. It cost a lot more. Think about it. They weren't. They were already released from slavery. But they had a little bit of dough. They had some matzah left over from their seder, that first seder they had in Egypt, and they had some dough on their back. That's what they had, and that food lasted 30 days. I saw a calculation before Shabbos. 61 meals approximately. Well, not approximately. They had, because they had the Pesach Seder night meal. And they had the next morning, and then every day for 2 meals a day. That just shows us that we only need 2 meals a day. We don't need more. And they kept that food kept going and going and going. Those few pieces of matzah. And suddenly they don't have food one day, and they complain. And the same thing with water. For 3 days they're walking. Where are they getting water from? Suddenly they don't have water. Complain. We are built-in complainers. It seems like we need to flip that switch. We need to learn that we see miracles every single day. We just need to open our eyes. We see connections to Hashem running the world all the time. Now, we do have a thing called the Yetzer Hara that's there to block us, that's there to help us grow. That's what the Yetzer Hara's job is. It's to help us to connect to Hashem. Yisro realized, hang on, there's something going on here. The Hashem is showing the world that who's in control. I need to join those people. And so he came along and joined Moshe. So he comes along, and it mentions a third time Yisro, Moshe's father-in-law, with his sons and the wife, came to the wilderness where they were encamped by the mountain of Hashem. So they were already at Har Sinai. There's a discussion as to exactly when he came. Did they come before the giving of the Torah? After giving the Torah, there's machlokas as to exact timing of his coming. But either way, if we follow the opinion that the Torah is in order, everything brought in the Torah is in order, unless it's something brought specifically out of order, which occasionally happens, then we can say Yisro came at this time, just before Matan Torah, and we're about to say he received the Torah. Otherwise, we have to say they converted after the fact. But either way, he is at Mount Sinai. And Moshe goes out to meet him. He bowed down, they kissed each other, they asked how they're doing. Yeah, Shalom Aleichem, Aleichem Shalom, that whole discussion. He brought him into the tent, and Moshe then told Yisro everything that had happened. Everything that had happened to Jewish people, that happened in Egypt, everything that was going on. Now, who was Yisro? Yisro was, as we said, Moshe's father-in-law. But prior to that, Yisro was one of Paro's 3 main advisors. And Yisro, when Paro was trying to decide, what am I going to do? How am I going to handle this threat of these Jewish people who are multiplying? At the beginning of Parashat Shmos, Jewish people were multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. Yisro didn't know what to do. So his three advisors, Bilam, who we encounter later on in the Torah, who was a wicked prophet, he had prophecy on a similar level to Moshe Rabbeinu, he was the prophet of the nations, he advised, no, you need to wipe the Jewish people out. Eov was another one of Paro's advisors. We've got a book of Eov in the Tanakh. Eov kept quiet, and Yisro could not handle this, and he ran away. But Yisro, when Moshe is telling Yisro exactly what had happened and how the Egyptians had died, last week at the sea, we heard that some, and we see in the Shiro, it's brought down, some of the Egyptians were churned around in the sea like straw. Others were like stones, and others were like lead. What's the difference? Why each one? Because the person who was the most wicked of all the Egyptians, he was like straw. He was churned around. He was punished, but we say midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Exactly as he did wrong to the Jewish people, so was done to him. He felt exactly what he had done to other people, and that's the way the world works. The person who was not such a good guy, but he didn't do so badly to Jewish people, he wasn't so good either. That person was punished like a rock, which goes slowly down in the water. It was churned around a little bit, but not as much. And the person who was evil, but wasn't so bad, he was kind of nice to his Jewish slaves, he was like lead. He dropped straight to the bottom. And I'm saying he as in he or she, male and female, were all punished because they were all involved in the way they treated the Jewish people. So the person who wasn't so bad, dropped like lead, wasn't punished in such a severe way. Everything that happens in this world is measure for measure. And Yisro heard this, and then he heard, hang on, but the plagues, each plague, this is what the Egyptians wanted to do to the Jews, and they did. Aha, that's how Hashem punished them. And he kind of now realized and put it all together. He realized, Hashem runs this world in a perfectly measured way. So it says, Yisro then rejoiced over all the good that Hashem had done for the Jewish people, rescuing from the sea. And then he used a phrase, which is a phrase that the first time it's brought in the Torah, but it's a phrase that you hear and we should hear all the time. Baruch Hashem. Blessed be Hashem. Hashem is the source of all blessing. He suddenly realized, we heard from Yosef, when Yosef was in Potiphar's house, it says that Yosef kept thanking Hashem for everything. Everything was Bezras Hashem, Baruch Hashem, Chaste Hashem. Everything was about Hashem. Even when he was in jail and he spoke to the butler and the baker, it was all Hashem. Everything is Hashem doing this. And now Yisro realized, it's all Hashem. He says, now I know Hashem is the greatest. Now I know Hashem is the God who created the world. There's no other gods. Yisro, the father of Moshe, he then took an offering. He took a korban oila to offer up to Hashem and feast offerings to Hashem. And then it says, and Aaron and the elders of the Jewish people came to eat bread with the father-in-law of Moshe before Hashem. So here's Yisro talking to Moshe, and he realizes what's going on. He brings his offering, and they have this massive feast. Aaron, the elders, and Yisro. Where was Moshe now? And it's brought down, Moshe was the waiter. Moshe served them. The leader of the Jewish people came around and served that meal to his father-in-law and to his brother and the elders. I assume he sat down with them as well. He wasn't going to stand there as a waiter with a tea towel over his arm, but that's what Moshe was doing. Yisro then the next day comes along and he sees Moshe sitting there and judging the people all day. Moshe's job was to sit and judge and give advice, and all day, in and out, one after another, thousands and thousands of people are coming to Moshe. And Yisro says to Moshe, what are you doing? You're going to wear yourself out completely. You can't do this on your own. You need help. So he suggested, Moshe says to him, because the people come and seek Hashem. They want to know what Hashem's message for them is. They want to know what the right way to deal with other people is. So they come to me. I'm what in our terms, the Gadol Hador. I'm the leader of the Jewish people. They come to me to ask advice. So Yisro, the father-in-law of Moshe, keeps referring to him as Yisro Chosen Moshe, the father-in-law of Moshe, says, it's not good. Don't behave like this. It's not the way you should be behaving. I'll give you some advice. Listen to what I'm going to tell you. He says, you be the representative to Hashem, and you convey Hashem's messages to the people. But in terms of judging them and the way you discern between one man and another and what you do, gather for yourself accomplished men, people who are God-fearing, people who know the truth, people who despise money. In other words, they're not there for the money. They're not there to take their own cut. There's honest, good people, and appoint them as leaders of people. So appoint them in groups. You need to appoint leaders of thousands of people, so you'll have one person who's in charge of 1,000. And then in that group, you'll have leaders of hundreds. So you'll have 10 other leaders who will be looking after each group of 100. Then you'll have leaders of 50 and leaders of 10. So every minion will have a leader. They will then be in a group of 50. Those groups of 50 will then be groups of 100, and those groups of 100 will be in groups of 1,000. And so you'll set up a hierarchy of leadership. If somebody's got a simple question, they'll go to their rabbi in their group of 10. If it's too hard and for him and he's not knowledgeable enough, they go to the next one, leader of 50. If he doesn't know enough, he'll go up and up and up. This is Yisro's advice. Now, Yisro, remember who he was. He was the priest of Midian. He was Moshe's father-in-law. He knew nothing about the Jewish people. He's been there for one day, and he's already giving Moshe advice. It's an interesting way of doing things, but guess what? Moshe listened to him. Moshe heeded the words of his father-in-law, and he did everything that he said. He chose men of accomplishment, same things, from among children of Israel. He appointed them heads of the people, leaders of thousands, leaders of hundreds, leaders of 50s, and leaders of 10. Exactly as Yisro said, Moshe did. They judged the people at all times, the difficult things they would bring to Moshe. So Moshe was the chief justice, the king, the head of the Jewish people. So only those complicated issues would come all the way up to Moshe. This was what Yisro put in place. And then the next pasuk, the end of the parsha about Yisro, says, "Vayishlach Moshe es choisnoi v'yelech lo el artzai." Moshe sent off his father-in-law, and he went to his land. At the end of Yisro, he disappeared. So here's Yisro who comes, joins the Jewish people, gives us advice, and then Moshe says, right, well, we need to find a place for you to stay. And Yisro said, nah, I'm going back. It's enough. Had enough. Not quite the case. Yisro decided that his role in the world would be to show the world about Hashem. His role is, I need to now take what I've learned. When he left is an interesting question. It's a whole debate how long he was with the Jewish people for. But he decided that he was going back to his land to teach the rest of the world about Yiddishkeit, about Hashem, about the Torah. He left his family behind and his children were there. And we know through history that the children of Yisro were some very great people amongst the Jewish people. But Yisro came, gave advice, and he left.
To ask you something. Here you say he's giving advice, but he wasn't even Jewish. When did he get converted?
We've got to assume at some point. Yeah, we can take advice from anybody. We don't mind taking good advice when we should. But that advice, it was from a practical perspective. He says, Moshe, you're going to wipe yourself out. You need to spread the burden a bit. And that's the end of Parsha of Yisro. Now, we call this whole Parshas Yisro. In a Chumash, what we call a Parsha is not Parshas Yisro. It's if you look at the way a Sefer Torah is written, there are gaps. And whenever there's a gap, that we call a Parsha. In a Chumash, in a Mikras Gedolos, in many Chumashim, they'll put a pei or a samach, depending if it's the end of a line or the middle of a line, but there's always a gap. And they'll write there pei or a samach to delineate that's the end of a Parsha. So when we talk about a Parsha, we talk about two different things. One is the Parsha, Parshas Yisro. But within Yisro, there are many gaps. And we're going to encounter lots of them in the next few minutes, because the next section of the Torah is B'chodesh Hashlishi L'tzeis B'nei Yisrael Me'eretz Mitzrayim V'yom hazeh ba'o midbar Sinai. In the third month, from the exodus of the children of Israel, they came from the land of Egypt. On this day, they arrived in Midbar Sinai, the wilderness of Sinai. They came to Mount Sinai. So it took 3 months, approximately 2.5 months, to get from Egypt to Mount Sinai. And the Torah tells in a brief way where we had gone. We traveled through the desert to get to Mount Sinai. Moshe went up to talk to Hashem. And Hashem says, tell Bnei Yaakov, tell the children of Israel, you saw what I did to Egypt. I've taken them out on the wings of eagles. I've brought you to me, says Hashem. And now we need to enter into a covenant between Hashem and the Jewish people and Hashem. It's now time that you understand what your role in the world is. Hashem said, we need to get ready to receive the Torah. The Torah is that covenant that Hashem has with us. We went through several other covenants later on. The very first covenant we had was Avraham Avinu with Bris Milah. Brit is a covenant. And so that was the first one. But now it's time for the whole nation to enter into covenant with Hashem. And so Hashem says to Moshe, go back down to the people, tell them to sanctify themselves, tell them that they need to wash their clothing, they need to go to the mikveh, they need to separate husband and wife, because they need to prepare, because on the third day they are going to receive the Torah. Hashem says, I will appear before the Jewish people on the third day. Moshe comes down, and Hashem gives the whole story of what has to happen. Only Moshe is allowed to come up on the mountain. The elders have to stay at a certain distance. Aaron, Yeshua, the elders all have to stay at a certain distance around. Nobody is allowed to come near the mountain. There's going to be like a fence around the mountain. If you touch that, anybody who comes there, Hashem says, that person will surely die. Animal, people not allowed onto the mountain. There's incredible holiness. Hashem's presence comes down there. Nobody's allowed there. So Moshe comes down, he sanctified the people, they washed their clothing, and he said, we need 3 days. We need husband and wife to separate. We need to make sure that we're completely pure for 3 days. And Moshe actually adds in an extra day from what Hashem said. Hashem said on the third day, and Moshe said 3 days. And Hashem agreed with him. On the third day, there was thunder and lightning and a heavy cloud on the mountain. The sound of the shofar was very powerful. When we blow a musical instrument, when we blow a shofar, we lose wind. We blow, and there's only a certain amount of time that we can blow for, and then it starts kind of tailing off. Believe me, I know it can be very hard when you've blown in COVID 8 times, 30 times, plus 100 times. I blew at home the 1 year, plus, and you keep going. By the time you're blowing that very last Tekiah Gedolah, it's really, really tough. And here we had this shofar that got louder and louder and louder. It says it was a blown shofar from the ram, one of the rams of Akedah Yitzchak, but it's a mystical thing that Hashem, so to speak, was blowing, the sound of the shofar. It says it was very powerful. The entire people in the camp shuddered. They were shaking from this noise. We've all heard very loud noises. I was 14 months ago, we were in Israel down south, right near the border of Gaza. One morning I opened the door of the room I was staying in to go to shul. It was still very dark because we're having an 8 minyan. As I opened the door, a bomb dropped in Gaza 5-6 kilometers away. It was like an earthquake. The ground was shaking and it was loud. That's kind of the experience. Now, that was already 8 k's away, but the Jewish people were right there. But it was an awesome experience. We've all heard noise. Most people have had some form of earthquake or earth tremor where you suddenly jolted. That's what it was. It just jolted them out of their slumber. Moshe brought the people from the camp towards Hashem. They stood at the bottom of the mountain. Mount Sinai was smoking because Hashem had come down in a fire. The smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the entire mountain shuddered exceedingly. I'm just reading the words. The sound of the shofar grew continually stronger, and Moshe would speak, and Hashem would respond to him with a voice. Hashem came down to the top of the mountain. He called Moshe up to the top. Moshe went up. Hashem said to Moshe, go down and warn the people again. Don't break through to see Hashem. We're not allowed to look. Even the Kohanim, whoever the Kohanim were at this point in time, because Aaron and his sons were only appointed later on, but we needed priests. It could have been the firstborn. Maybe they knew they were, but they were only appointed later. But the Kohanim should not even approach, because this is Hashem bringing his presence here. Hashem's presence, nobody can see Hashem's face, and I'm using very big quotes for that because Hashem is not physical at all. One of the 13 principles of faith is that we know that Hashem is completely not physical. We can understand really what Hashem is not. We can't understand what Hashem is. at our level as human beings. We can understand Hashem is not physical. When it says Hashem sees or Hashem stretches out his hand or all these physical human concepts, it's because in order to reach out, we need a hand. In order to see, we need eyes. In order to hear, we need ears. And so therefore, it's explained to us, Hashem hears, because we can understand, oh, he hears, he's got ears. No, he doesn't have ears, but obviously he has the ability to hear because he has no physicality whatsoever. So Hashem says, go down, you and Aaron with you, and the Kohen and the people, don't break through, don't come up. It says it again, and Moshe goes down to the people, and then we have the Aseret HaDibros. Etc. I'm going to come back to all of the Aseret HaDibros. And then the Parsha ends. It's a very short Parsha. There are only 72 verses in it. The Parsha ends with a mitzvah. The Aseret HaDibros ends by saying, V'chol ha'am roem es hakolis. The entire people saw the thunder. We don't normally see thunder, we hear thunder, but the story says roem es hakolis. V'es halapidim, and the flames. V'es kol hashoifa es hahar ashen. V'yar ha'am v'yanunu v'yamdu merachok. And all the people, they heard the sound of the shofar, the smoking mountain. The people saw and trembled. They stood from afar, and they said to Moshe, you speak to us, and we'll hear. Let Hashem not speak to us, lest we die. That's the end of the Aseret HaDibros. The next Parsha in the Torah, and I use that word Parsha, that's why I introduced it, is about making a altar, and that the Jewish people on an altar, first it says don't make other gods before Hashem, but then says when you go to the altar, don't put steps to go up to the altar, put a ramp, because it's not tznius. We should not walk up steps, because walking up steps, people, there's the ability, the steps can see the person's parts that should be covered. Walk up a ramp, it's more tznius, which is a phenomenal thing to end the Aseret HaDibros with. But it's just a message to us. Tznius doesn't mean only the clothing I wear. Tznius means the way I purport myself, the way I talk to other people, the way I walk around in public, the way I behave. And so that's brought right after Aseret HaDibros. All right, let's speak a little bit about the Aseret HaDibros. So, first up, in fact, let me just go back in here, I want to see. It's brought down at the end of the Parsha. There is a box. In most Chumashim, they bring a box and they say the way we read the Torah normally is different for the Aseret HaDibros to the way the rest of the Torah is read. And if you listen on Shabbos, the way it's read, it's a slightly different tune, and they break up the verses differently because the Aseret HaDibros are something special. And they note here, Article writes, the Ten Commandments with the trop, which is the cantillation notes, used by the reader for the public reading on the Sabbath and on Shavuos. It's different to what's normally done. And there's certain verses that are broken up into parts. And each of those parts is a Parsha in itself. Now, interestingly enough, ArtScroll says the 10 Commandments. Now, these are the Aseret HaDibros, the 10 statements, the 10 phrases, the 10 words, not the 10 Commandments. A commandment is a mitzvah, but it doesn't say anywhere that these are the Aseret HaMitzvahs, the 10 mitzvahs. The term 10 Commandments comes to us, we've inherited it from the Christians, essentially. The 10 Commandments, as they're called, are not really commandments in themselves. And in fact, according to different opinions, there are anything between 11 and 15 commandments, depending on how we count them, in the Aseret HaDibros. So why are they called the 10 Commandments? And why do they have this place so high up in the Jewish world? Many, many shuls have a depiction of the 10 Commandments. Interestingly enough, if you go to most shuls, they are drawn as semicircular tablets. the Ten Commandments, what we know about the Luchos. Let me take a step back. The Aseret HaDibros were written by Hashem or engraved by Hashem on 2 stone tablets, which were not curved on top. They were square, box-shaped tablets. They were not carved on top. It comes from a verse in the Navi which says, inscribe it on the tablet of your heart. And so the 2 halves are meant to depict the heart. In other words, take the Aseret HaDibros to heart. Now the Vilna Gaon, amongst others, says within the words or the letters of the Aseret HaDibros, all 613 mitzvahs can be found. That's based on a Gemara right at the end of the Gemara in Makkas, which says, Makkas in Chof Beis Amud Beis 23b, right near the bottom of the page, says, Dorash Rabbi Simlai, Rabbi Simlai taught that Sheish Meos v'Shlosh Yisrei mitzvahs nemru loy leMoshe. 613 mitzvahs were related to Moshe. Moshe heard 613 mitzvahs from Hashem. Hashem told Moshe 613 mitzvahs. There are 365 negative mitzvahs, and which correspond to the days of the solar year, 365 days in the year. There are 248 positive mitzvahs. Keneged Evarav Shel Adam, the number of parts in the human body is the way they translate it. So they note here, quoting the Rivan, the 365 negative mitzvahs corresponding to the number of days of the solar calendar symbolize that each day, as it were, exhorts people not to do sins. The 248 positive commandments correspond to the human body's organs, brought down in a mission in Olos, symbolize that every one of a human being's organs asks him to perform a mitzvah. In other words, each organ in our body is connected to another mitzvah. We don't necessarily know this, but there are some sources who bring down that if you do that mitzvah, working for this part of the body or that part of the body. So, and then the Gemara continues. Amar Rav Hamnuna says, Makra, which verse teaches us that there's 613 verses in the Torah. Torah tzivalanu Moshe Morasha, and it says, etc. Moshe commanded us the Torah as a Morasha, as an inheritance. It's one of the things that we teach a little kid when they first start speaking. One of the songs we teach them is Torah tzivalanu Moshe. Torah, the word Torah, Tov Vav Reish Hey, is gematria, is a numerical value of Shishma V'chad Srei Have, 611. The word Torah is 611, and we must add the first 2 of the Aseret HaDibros, and I'll come back to how that's all worked out. Anoich Hashem v'lo yeh lecha, Anoich Hashem am Hashem your God, and v'lo yeh lecha, you should not have any other gods. Mipnei Gevura Ma'umanim, which were heard directly from Hashem. And so therefore, we have 2 groups of the 613 mitzvahs. We learn out 613 from Torah Tzivalanu Moshe Morasha. Torah is 611. When the Jewish people were standing on Sinai, it said this noise, the sounds, the flames, everything, their senses were completely thrown into a state of confusion. And it's brought down that their neshamas were thrown from their bodies. They were so incredibly in awe of what happened. And Hashem said, Anoich Hashem, the first of the Aseret HaDibros, and the people thrown out, and Hashem, so to speak, had to resurrect them. And they came back, and Hashem said the second one, Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim, don't have any other gods before me, and their bodies were thrown out. And Hashem resurrected again. They came back to Moshe and they said, okay, this is just too much for us. We can't keep going. You listen to Hashem and you transmit what Hashem tells us. The first 2 we've heard. Now the rest of Torah, the gematria of 611, Moshe heard from Hashem and he transmitted. Hashem didn't tell us directly that 613. He told us 2. We heard 2 directly in our ears from Hashem. The other 611 we heard indirectly from Moshe. That's what's brought down in the Gemara there. But the Vilna Gaon learns out that within the letters of the Aseret HaDibros, every single mitzvah is there. Every single one. How he learns it out is well beyond the scope of my brain, but we call them the 10 Commandments because as I said, Christian teachings. I did a little bit of research online. Let me work backwards. Let's start with what are the mitzvahs within the Ten Commandments. So there are several different opinions as to which mitzvahs actually are part of the Aseres Dibros. And the main discussion is belief in Hashem a mitzvah, or is it something that every mitzvah is dependent on? In other words, I need to have belief in Hashem, emunah, as above everything. Without that, I can't do any mitzvahs. I've got to start somewhere. That's the starting point. So, and it's a machlokas between a dispute between different Rishonim from over 1,000 years ago, whereby do we count it or do we not? Now, the Sefer HaChinuch, which is the first work written which brought the mitzvahs down in the order of the pashas. So you take out Sefer HaChinuch and he says, in this week's parsha, in Parshas Yisro, he says there's 17 mitzvahs, 14 positive, and, there's 17 mitzvahs. I didn't note down how many were positive and negative, but in fact, I do have it noted down. 3 positive and 14 negative mitzvahs. Now, of those, 14 of them are within the Aseres HaDibros, and 3 are mitzvahs after the Aseres HaDibros. And so, just as a matter of interest, the 3 after, because it was a very short section straight after, was not to make a form of a man even for decoration. Don't make statues of men and various other things. Don't build with hewn stones. The Mishkan is not allowed to be chopped up. The stones are not allowed to be made with metal implements, because metal implements can be used for warfare. We're talking about the altar of Hashem. And don't take steps on the altar, which is what we discussed, make a ramp. So those 3 are after Aseres HaDibros at the end of the Parsha. According to the Chinuch, before that, there's 14 mitzvahs in the Aseres HaDibros. So we've got the 10 commandments, according to us, have 14 mitzvahs. According to others, there might be 15, because the last one is actually 2. And according to others, there's fewer because, as I said, belief in Hashem might not be a mitzvah in itself. It's above all mitzvahs. Do we count or not? And the Chinuch essentially follows Rambam. Ramban has an argument with Rambam as to the first one, belief in Hashem. But just very quickly, mitzvah to believe in Hashem, according to the Chinuch, based on the Rambam. That we believe in a God, that we believe in no God besides Hashem. There's only one God. We're not to make a statue, not to bow down to idolatry, not to worship idolatry in that way it's worshipped, not to swear in vain, take a vain oath. Mitzvah of sanctifying Shabbos with words, that's in here. And in fact, there is brought down from 2 different verses within the Aseres HaDibros. Not to work on Shabbos, the mitzvah to honor a father and a mother, and that's really the first 5. The first 5 of the Aseres HaDibros are encompassed in those mitzvahs. It's an interesting question, because we generally say the next 5 are ben Adam l'chavero, between man and man, and the first 5 are ben Adam l'makom, between man and Hashem. But I've just said honor your father and your mother is on Hashem's side. Most authorities understand that to mean that in order to create a child, you need a father, you need a mother, and you need Hashem. Without Hashem, you can't have a child. And therefore, honoring parents is a step towards honoring Hashem. It's one of very few mitzvahs where we're told if you honor your parents, you will get long life. Now, what does long life mean? Long life means you'll get life in the next world. So mitzvah, you'll get life in the next world. And you'll get long life. When we say to somebody, I wish you long life, what we're really saying to them is wishing you long days. That every day you have in this world should be fulfilled and filling and doing good things. That means a long life. Long life doesn't mean that everybody lives till 120. Long life means that you used all your 120 years to the best of your ability. So that's why that one's in the first 5. Then the second 5, ben Adam l'chavero, between man and his friend, between man and man, not to kill, not to, the way they translate it here is reveal the nakedness of a man's wife, in other words, adultery. Now, the next one is the direct translation we normally hear is do not steal. The mitzvah do not steal actually appears later in the Torah. This is talking about kidnapping, which is very, very appropriate. I mean, we are mechuyev in the Aseres HaDibros, not the rest of the world. I'll come back to it in a minute. But don't kidnap. Don't testify falsely, and don't covet something that doesn't belong to you. It's that one there is, for many, many of us, very, very difficult. Don't be jealous of other people's things. Hashem's telling us how to think, not how to do. It's about thinking. I must not want somebody else's house or somebody else's wife or somebody else's anything else that the person's got. Hashem's telling us this is the way you need to think. So that's the 10 that we've got. So I just playing around, just comparing the Torah with then what was translated into the Greek Septuagint, which was then translated into Latin, which was then translated into many, many other languages. And then you had many splits in the church over the years. So the church adopted what they then called the Old Testament, rewrote it in various different places, and then different versions of the Old Testament throw things differently. Now, they call it the Ten Commandments, this is where it comes from. So this is an article from a woman who was Catholic, who's now Protestant. And she lists the Jewish, Catholic, and Protestant 10 Commandments. I'm using that phrase very loosely, because as I said many times, I'm trying to emphasize that. Aseres HaDibros, they're 10 statements, they're not commandments. As I've said, we've had 14 according to Sefer HaChinuch. So just according to Christianity, I'm the Lord your God, you shall not have other gods besides me. We don't say that. We say, I'm the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Okay, that's a combination of the two. The Protestants say, don't have any other gods besides God. We then say the second one, believe in God alone. They say, don't take the name of God in vain, Catholics, and Protestants don't take, you shall not make unto you any graven images. Not take the name of the Lord your God in vain is the third one. It's actually not, but according to this thing for us, remember the Shabbos to keep it holy according to Catholics, or don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain according to Protestants. The fourth one according to Catholics, honor your father and mother. Well, that's the fifth one according to us. Of the Aseres HaDibros, not the mitzvahs even. Remember Shabbos is the fourth one according to Protestants. Need I go on? Don't kill, honor your father and your mother, don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't steal. They call it don't steal straight. Okay? Don't bear false witness, don't steal. They kind of get them all out of order. They change them, and yet they say they keep them. Now, the problem is twofold. One is the Aseres HaDibros are introduced in the Torah. Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher tzeisim eretz Mitzrayim. I'm Hashem your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Hashem only took the Jewish people out of the land of Egypt. We made a covenant with Hashem. Hashem made a covenant with Bnei Yisrael. That's where we became a nation. He did not make a covenant with anyone else in the world. The world were given 7 Noahide laws. That's what the world was given. If they keep those 7 Noahide laws, they have fulfilled their mitzvahs and will receive a reward in the next world. If they take what was given to us and they then say, oh, hang on, some guy came along, he died for your sins, so don't worry about it. You don't need to keep any of this, because as long as you believe in him, you're okay. It's a complete disregard for what the Torah is saying. And so it's an interesting way of presenting it, because they put up these 10 commandments as the kind of tenet of faith in their religion. And we don't even mention the Aseres HaDibros in our davening. It was put in play in davening at various times in history. They did include the Aseres HaDibros. Now, if you look in the Siddur, after Shachris in the morning, there's some people have a custom to say it, but we don't elevate them above everything else, because every one of the mitzvahs is a mitzvah from Hashem. There's 613 mitzvahs, not 10 mitzvahs. We've got Aseres HaDibros. We've got 10 statements, 10 ways of living our life. Now, encompassed in all of those 10 are all 613, and we learn them out, and we're able to extrapolate from that. And we know that they were written on the luchos. In fact, the luchos were of such a state that it says that I'm sitting on one side and the person sitting on the other side, and on that side and on that side, and above and below, everybody could see and read them as if they're looking at it, and you could also see straight through. So if somebody, now, they were not available for people to see at all times because they were in the Aron. They were kept in the Aron, as well as, so, and then Moshe came down 4 days later, smashed them. Those pieces were put into the Aron as well as the second set, which were written in the same manner. Slightly different words in the second set. And there's an interesting discussion as to what was written, what was in the Aron, what was written. But either way, these Aseret Dibros were the 10 statements that form the crux of Jewish belief. But it's not 10 mitzvahs. It's at least 14, maybe even 15, according to some fewer, but there's not 10 mitzvahs in the Aseret Dibros at all. And so we need to know that what Hashem gave us at Mount Sinai was an incredible experience where he spoke directly to us. We sat there and we listened to everything that Hashem had to say. We accepted it, we took it on. And in fact, in next week's Parsha, the famous words of Naaseh v'nishma are said. And we said, Hashem said, I'm going to give you the Torah. In this week's Parsha, it's brought down, we said, Naaseh. We will do. In next week's Parsha, it says, we will, Naaseh v'nishma, we will do, and we will hear. In other words, Hashem, you tell me to do this, I'm going to do it. Now, explain to me what I need to do. So we will do and we will hear. Now, interestingly enough, the chapters and verses in the Torah are not Jewish. We have parshas. Each parsha is a separate parsha in the Torah. At some point in time, one of the Christian popes or preachers or whatever it was decided to write down the whole Tanakh chapter and verse. We still use it, but it's not the way we break up the Torah. And in fact, in the Aseret Dibros, in the last 5, there's only a few verses there, but some of them are split up into separate parshas. They're like separated in the Torah. The verse where it says that we said Naaseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear, is chapter 24, verse 7. 24/7. We need to do and hear what Hashem says 24/7. So we can use that to help us. But generally, we follow that and we use it. And all our Chumashim have chapters and verses numbering according to that setup. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's exactly the way the Torah was set out and where we break things. And often you'll find a Parsha ends. In fact, I think Parsha's Yisro. Yeah. Itself. No, it doesn't. But there are several parshas whereby it'll be verse 7 of a chapter, because the way it was broken up by this Christian priest was different to the way we break it up. They did it based on whatever tradition they might have had, whatever he wanted to do. We break it up the way the rabbis taught us, all the way back to what Moshe got from Hashem. Moshe wrote down what Hashem told him, and we got it like that. And so we need to know that everything comes from Hashem. Every single day of the year, 24/7, is something from Hashem. Continually, all the time, Hashem gives us what we need at the time that we need it. Now, I saw something phenomenal this morning, and I want to end with this. Parshas B'Shalach was last Shabbos. Spoke about in B'Shalach that we left Egypt. The Egyptians chased us. They were killed in the sea, as we said. And then we got the man, and we were traveling through the desert. We got water and the clouds and the man. And Hashem looked after us and continues to look after us and to feed us. Now, unfortunately, on Shabbos, or fortunately on Shabbos, 3 people, thank God, were released. Ohad Ben Ami, Eli Sharabi, and Or Levi were all released. Now, we all saw those images. They were horrific. These poor men. They will heal physically in a very short time. How long it's going to take them, who knows, to heal internally and change. But they were returned to us. And I saw this morning in one of the good news groups, B'Shalach, the letters of B'Shalach, are the 3 people's names. Ohad Ben Ami, Eli Sharabi, and Or Levin. Beis Shin Lamed, Chozrim were returned. And we need to know that just like they were returned, like they were supposed to, for whatever reason, we don't understand why, but Hashem, thank God, got them out. We look forward to the day, please God, it should be today, when the rest of the hostages come back and we get peace and Mashiach speedily in our time.
Amen.